Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're joined here tonight in the studio by Engineer Mostsfs Nagary, the Deputy Chairman of the Egyptian Exporters Association, Expo Link. Engineer Nagary, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Hani. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Always a pleasure.
At the beginning of this year, of
yes.
course.
Thank you very
and
much.
And I seize this opportunity to congratulate all Egyptians and all Christians of Egypt with the New Year and
Yes.
with the Christmas. And I hope that 2024 would bear more peace and quietness, and we all pray for our people in Gaza.
Yes.
To overcome and to stand against the Israelis in humanitarian war against the civilians.
Yes, well, hopefully, God willing, that will take place. And talking about the good wishes now, Egypt is really looking forward to have a more prosperous new year, and really emphasizing enhancing the investment and trade sectors here in Egypt. Before we start talking about Egypt and its trade partnership with the rest of the world countries, let's have a more focused spotlight on the African continent. Now, we've reached $5.5 billion worth of trade by the end of 2023 with the rest of the African states. But how can we work on enhancing and strengthening the investments and the trade between African relations generally? We've always been speaking about developing and adapting, or really working on having a better investment law for foreign direct investments in general. And obviously Africa has a very specific sort of condition than the rest of the international world. So how can we actually enhance and strengthen the trade relationship between Egypt and the rest of the African states?
First of all, we have to say that 2023 was not an easy year for everyone. And most of the developed countries have suffered a lot, and you can imagine the countries in Africa, how they were suffering much more, according to what we have seen at the beginning of 2023, with collapse of two mega banks in the global. One is Silicon Valley, and then it was followed by Credit Suisse, and which affected the global economy in general. And that's why we have seen inflation increasing, and federal and central banks were facing this inflation by increasing the interest rates, which affected high prices of food, high prices of most of the commodities, of the industry inputs. And it was really a very bad start for 2023. And Africa was affected a lot according to that. However, Egypt was following on monthly basis, if I see the relation with Africa, because you know that there was a continent agreement which were approved a few years ago, and many of the parliaments of African countries signed for that, and there was some, as we say, technical problems according certifications of origins and the percentage of the local input of industry to permit to have this free agreement on the soil. So that's why Egypt really planned to increase the trade, and we were all encouraged to have a sort of assistance by our government according to the export fund, which have given to exports of Africa a privilege than other destinations. And we have seen that there was about 50% rebate for the transport, which is one mega factor for the trade for Africa, because it's always one leg trade, as we say, that if we are exporting to Africa, not all the countries are able to re-export to Egypt, while we are encouraging this also leg to be happen. We are always trying to search for cereals which we are importing from different destinations that we could be preferred to import from Africa. So that's why we see that there is a few trials which have been successfully done during 2023, and I think that in 2024 we will see much more than 5.5 billion trade. But I can tell that, you know, always the geopolitical problems are always showing from time to time, and what we have seen in the last months, according to the crisis in the Red Sea, would damage a little bit the trade between Egypt and West African nations. But at the end, we see that always Africa is our main market for the coming few years, and most of the exporters of Egypt are always joining in the missions, the trade missions, which is always giving and taking place to African, either west or east or south. And at the end, I can tell that what happened in 2023 regarding the Egyptian trade was positive, regardless of what we have seen globally from the crisis and from wars and from nature crisis problems, earthquakes and floods and so on, so on. So at the end, Egypt, I think, was doing fine despite all these problems.
Yes. Engineer Nagary, now you've mentioned that a lot of the trade is a one-way trade or a one-leg trade, as you mentioned. Now, is this the responsibility, or is the pressure bigger on Egypt to make it a two-way trade, or is the responsibility on other countries, other African states, because all countries have their own problems and the geopolitical turbulences, as you've mentioned as well. So who is responsible to make this a two-way trade? Is it Egypt? Is it the other African countries? Is it the responsibility of COMESA or the International African Free Trade Agreement?
First of all, there should be a corresponding relation between the banks, because at the end, if you export or you import, you have to pay for that, or you have to get the money. So at the end, the first step is the banks. And I think that Afro-Exim Bank is doing a good job in this, and that's why they are very close to the Egyptian exporters and manufacturers to try to attract them to Africa. And they are trying to finance and to try to give loans with lower interest rates. So banks is number one. You have to secure your money. This is number one. Number two is the transport. Okay, not all the countries in Africa are having ports. Most of them are inland countries, and that's why that inland transport is an issue. So that's why Egypt, with the historical trade relation and the trade agreements with many blocks in the whole world, we have a really very good base of forming trade agreements, is really leading that with other countries like South Africa, with Nigeria, with Morocco. But at the end, these four main trading countries in Africa, they are all trying to facilitate the trade between the nations of Africa. But at the end, I can tell you that there is a lot of improvement in the infrastructure in Africa. We have mentioned that Egypt is having a greater chance by a project like Haya Karima, which is done in Egypt. It can be done in Africa. by the Egyptian companies, because we have a very wide experience at the moment in the infrastructures through the Egyptian companies, and it can be financed by the European Union or by the US, or because everybody is trying to increase the living level of the Africans, otherwise there will be immigration. So at the end there is a geopolitical issues which have to be discussed, and it was mentioned in the COP27 and 28 as well, because Africans were really the least to supply heat and carbon emissions, and they are the main countries to be damaged, and they are suffering. So everybody was talking about that, and Egypt was leading African continent to talk in front of COP27 and 28. Egypt was taking this privilege to speak about the African countries. So at the end, there is a big demand in Africa. There is a very big population increasing in Africa, and there should be a lot of chances against challenges, as we say.
Yes. Well, Engineer Nagary, you've mentioned an example such as the Decent Life Initiative, and it seems that one of the things that Egypt can be really exporting is the development work, working on infrastructure and developmental work and sustainable development, which Egypt has a vision and a goal for 2030 and the rest of the African continent for 2063. Now, you are, I mean, talking from the exporter's point of view, you're usually exporting products and raw materials, but now we're talking about exporting expertise, development projects. Where do they intersect, both things? Because you obviously work on agricultural products, you work on exporting raw materials, but development work is a different animal altogether. So where do they intersect? Where can we actually make use of exporting not so tangible products, but also at the same time they are quite essential for an African continent that really needs a lot of infrastructure work?
Yeah, as you know, that Egypt is not exporting any raw materials at the moment. We are always exporting final product, or if we can talk about even the fresh products, they are not exported as a fresh. There is a lot of processes done. So this is one issue that we are trying from our part as Egyptians to increase the value of our exports. This is one issue. For Africa, there is no unity of taste or requirement for all the countries. They are totally separate taste and separate culture, and even for the food habits and the recipes are quite different. So that's why Egypt is well aware of that. But on the other side, our belief that we should be inside the continent by hub stores or by exhibitions, continuous exhibitions, and this is with that you will feel the taste of each country. But as I tell you, that many of the Egyptian companies started to be there, but of course they need a lot of support, and we need to push them more and more, because if we say that Africa continent is not virgin anymore, as we say, no. Chinese are there, Indians are there, Lebanese was before there. So at the end of this, you should be there. You should be inside the country with your people to understand the taste of the Africans. So what we are doing is just some projects in the electrical section, or in construction section, or in the Medicare, or this is Egypt is having quite good chances in. But if we talk about the trade itself, I think that if there should be a way to attract the Egyptian companies to establish their companies in the African countries, the trade will double, because at the time being they are not only going to import from Egypt, they are going to try to export. And this is, we always say that the healthy trade is always have two legs. We never look to increase our exports and not to import. No, even His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is always saying that we have to increase the trade between Egypt and Africa, and should be in two ways. We are depending mainly now on the beef from Africa.
Yes.
So at the end, there is they have some cereals which we need, some wheat, some fava beans, okay, some corn. So that's why. But the only point is to transport and to try to have the corresponding banking good system to try to facilitate the trade itself.
Yes.
But one way or another, we are increasing year by year, of course.
Well, African countries would always welcome other investors, be it from Europe or Asia or the Americas. However, they're much more cautious or skeptical when it's another African country that's trying to establish some sort of an investment in their own.
Yeah.
So is that because of much more of skepticism on behalf of the African states? Do they have a competitive streak within themselves? Is the international community working on actually feeding such a competitiveness and skepticism, because then it would mean more business for them? Or is it just a lack of business experience, cutting the deals, facilitating the work, or through the banking system as well?
No. Africans was trading since centuries, okay? And if I review the trade even in Egypt at the time of the pharaohs, it started with Somalia and Syria. This was the first trade that we used to import wood, a special type of wood, and a special type of perfumes, okay? And it was coming from Somalia. So the trade between Egypt and Africa was the start. It was not Europe, it was not the Gulf, it was not Asians. So at the end, there is a history for the trade. But they are trying to attract investment. Of course, many of the African countries are trying to attract investments. But we always say that you should have easy birth and easy departure, always. Because at the time being, we see hot money and floating capitals, as we say, and these people, even in Egypt or the Europeans or the Americans, they like to come to a country which facilitate for them to the birth, but also if they like to move, it should be easy.
Yes.
So at the end, Egypt is trying to form that in even the trade, the continent trade agreement, that there should be facility while you come or you want to get out. So Egypt, as I mentioned, is having a historical relation in the trade agreements with the countries. We have seen in 2023 that Egypt was among the 6 countries were joining BRICS.
Yes.
And we started yesterday, okay? So at the end, Egypt is always a player in the trade agreements and the blocks which is leading the world now. The world is not moving individually. All the countries are trying to find the main block which will facilitate for them the trade and the investment and the industry and tourism, everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Egypt is actually working on creating a more conducive environment for trade and investment, attracting foreign investment, direct investments as well. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
Egypt capitalizes on its location bridging the Middle East, Africa and Europe to become a regional trade and investment gateway and energy hub, hoping to attract information and communication technology sector investments for its digital transformation program. The country is part to more than 100 bilateral investment treaties. It is member of the World Trade Organization, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and the Greater Arab Free Trade Area (GAFTA). However, the Egyptian economy has been hardly hit by the Russian military operation in Ukraine, which caused many foreign investors to flee the emerging markets, including Egypt, and stressed the country budget as it struggled to confront rising global wheat and energy prices, while the defending of the value of the Egyptian pound. On December 17, 2022, the International Monetary Fund IMF approved a 46 months agreement for Egypt under the extended fund facility worth 3 billion US dollar. The IMF loan was conditioned on the government of Egypt undertaking a number of structural reforms, including the adoption of a flexible exchange rate, implementation of the state ownership policy to the encouraging privatization in the Egyptian economy, and the lifting of the import restrictions that were imposed on the spring of 2022. The IMF loan was also conditioned on 14 billion US dollar in co-financing, 8.7 billion US dollar of which is expected to come from the sale of state-owned assets, and the remaining 5.4 billion US dollar of which is expected to come from the loans from other sources. Egypt actually previously undertook a set of difficult macroeconomic reforms as part of the 3-year 12 billion IMF program in November 2016. The government actually understands that attracting foreign direct investment is key to addressing many of its economic challenges, and has stated its intention to create a more conducive environment for FDI. It works on handling investors' problems and obstacles, including excessive bureaucracy, lack of transparency, and even enforcement of laws, and difficult accessing for foreign currency to repatriate profit or import goods.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Engineer Nagary. Sir, now, you've mentioned the blocks and the importance of Egypt being part of these blocks. Now, if we are working on having more facilitations through these blocks, what do we have to offer? What would be required of Egypt to actually facilitate for other members of such blocks? Would that create much more of an economic burden on Egypt, or does Egypt have strong cards to bargain with in terms of what we have to offer to the rest of the member states?
Before Egypt entering the blocks, how was the trade and how was the investments? Okay, comparing that after we joined the Arab League trade facilitation program, and then the European Union partnership, and then the Mercosur, and then the COMESA, and then Agadir agreement, and then the African continent, and lately BRICS. Okay, so we have to evaluate and to analyze what we were before and after. Of course, Egypt, with the joining the blocks, have gained a lot. First of all, trade was bigger, investments was much higher, despite what happened in the last 2-3 years, which is globally. It was not a problem specifically in Egypt, but at the end, this is giving a breeze for the people of the trade and of the industry in general. Egypt is having more better chances by its location, And as maybe I mentioned before in previous interviews, that the industry geographical spots is moving to a point which is connected shortly legs to the markets. And that's why we have seen, according to the crisis of the COVID-19 and with the Russian war to Ukraine, that these transport legs were cut off. And at the end, prices were increased and the trade was not that healthy. And that's why many of the industrial countries started to try to allocate their industries in central points, which Egypt is one of these hubs really, because we are having a very good location in the center of the world and connected with many ports and to everywhere. So that's why we see that there is a new strategies for the countries, for the developed countries, to try to move in points centralized. Okay, so that's why we see that even China themselves, they stopped to increase several types of industries and they are trying to push them out. India as well is trying to look for Africa, and they are also investing a lot in Egypt, especially in the green hydrogen. So at the end, we have to know what privilege we have in Egypt. We have, of course, market, big market. We have a location as well.
Well, we are pretty much centralized geographically. We couldn't be much more centralized. Now, the whole world witnesses a lot of crises, be it the pandemic or the Russian-Ukrainian war, now what's happening in Gaza. And they're all reasons for inflation and for the disruption of trade routes and maritime transportation, as we are witnessing right now. So how far are we in terms of building some sort of a resilient economy to withstand recurring catastrophes or crises around the world, be it natural ones or man-made ones? I mean, as the exporters, Egyptian Exporters Association, with all what's going on, is it still, in terms of purely business, can we still cut deals? Can we still make business and trade transactions take place in the midst of all what's going on?
This is the competitiveness of Egypt. Of course, we are having a better competitiveness against our, not we say competitors, but at the end we are having still a low cost of power. According to the valuation of the Egyptian currency, the labor cost is less. And at the end, Egypt is a bit in a better position for export at the end. So, and we see that even in the exhibitions in Europe, which are in several fields like industrial engineering or in the medical sector or the furniture or in the agri products or industrial food. We see always that the number of exporters participating in the exhibitions are increasing, and always the exhibition in everywhere is trying to attract Egyptians because they say you have a better chance. So that's why we understand the message, and at the end we have to be optimistic that we are always having a better chance to increase our production. As we say always, we need stability in the finance system. We need stable legislations, but at the end, the environment for Egypt is always positive.
Ladies and gentlemen, on this very optimistic note, hopefully 2024 will be a better year in terms of trade and investment, not just with African countries, but with the whole of the international community. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my distinguished guest, Engineer Mostsfs Nagary, the Deputy Chairman of the Egyptian Exporters Association, Expo Link. Engineer Nagary, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
It was my pleasure.
Always a pleasure, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nara International. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.